Today, it's the return of Ron Burgundy as we get ready to change the steering head bearings in our CB750. Hey everyone, what's going on? I'm Mike Barker. Thank you so much for tuning into another video. And yeah, today we're going to be addressing the steering slop in old Ron Burgundy. To do this, first we're going to remove the front forks, and then we're going to install a set of all balls tapered steering stem bearings. This is going to be a little bit of a longer video, so let's get at it. So like I said, we're going to go ahead and remove the forks first. Well, actually I've already done that. There's a link up here to a video where I explain how to remove the front wheel and the forks as well. But now we're gonna actually go ahead and remove the bars. We're gonna slide the instruments as well as the headlight bucket and the wiring harness off to the side and get to removing this triple tree. Now actually, I should mention, on Ron here, the choke for the later model CB750Ks is actually up here, not on the carburetors. Well, I mean, it is on the carburetors, but it's actuated by a knob up here. Go ahead and remove this at the same time that you're taking off the handlebars. Poor man's cafe racer. Well, flipped around. You know what I mean. Just so there's not a lot of stress on the wiring harness, I decided to block everything up with a stool that I had in the garage. There's a little bit of history to this old stool slash step ladder thing. This was in my grandfather Barker's garage. I don't know how many things have been drilled, painted. This thing could probably tell some serious stories if it wasn't an inanimate object. Now before we can slide all this out of the way, we have to loosen up and remove these two 10mm bolts that are holding this brake manifold. It's the point where your lower brake line and your upper brake line come together, but it's also where your brake light switch is plumbed into. So remove these two bolts, slide everything out of the way. Make sure you get the little spacer, the little shim that's behind here. This helps actually locate your brake hose with this little cutout here. Sweet! All right, we're down to the bare bones now. Well, what do we do now? A couple more bolts we gotta loosen up first. All right, so we've got a 12mm bolt and nut. Ooh, there we go. So to get this big nut off, really, you need the proper size socket or wrench. I don't have that. What I do have though, again from my grandfather's garage of all things, is a 1 3/16 impact socket, which will work. It's actually a metric size. It's 30mm. Nut. If you follow my Instagram at all, which you should, it's linked, I'll link it down below. You'll see that I found a, what I thought was a bee's nest in this bike, in one of the fork ears. Apparently it's a mud wasp. Ooh. Buzz buzz. Washer, wasp nest. Ooh. There we go, there's the top. This has a retaining nut on it. There's no way that this can actually fall out of here until this comes off. And to remove this, I actually bought an adjustable motorcycle shock wrench that I think will work on this just fine. Unboxing complete. If you're removing this for a different reason, and you're actually reusing the bearings, you're gonna wanna make sure that you don't lose all the little ball bearings that come out. There's a bunch up in there still too. Now we're gonna take a hammer and some various long pointy metal objects and knock these bearing races out. All right, so we got the old bearings out. That's great. Now we've got our fancy new all balls tapered needle bearings that we're gonna put in there. Ooh. Stickers, always fun. Loose instructions, dust caps, what I believe is washers and spacers, and our most excellent bearings. Hopefully at this point you haven't thrown away the old bearings yet, or at least the old bearing races. Because what you'll notice is if you take the top one and the bottom one and put them on top of each other, there is a slight, very slight difference in the diameter of the two bearings. The smaller diameter bearing is the top one, the lower diameter bearing is the bottom one. When you get these out of the package, these bearings are covered in a light layer of oil. We still have to pack these bearings, so I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, on this piece of paper that comes with the kit, it actually says, before installing the lower bearing, assemble the stock bearings with some balls between the races. Match the height of the stock bearing setup within ±1 millimeter by using the included washers. Typically, the thinner washer is used under the lower bearing. If the OEM bearing matches the height of the replacement lower bearing, do not use the washers. Well, I just did a quick test and compared them side by side, and it turns out the bearing in this kit is the same bearing as what came off this bike, so I'm not going to use any washers. Wrong! I actually did use one. Keep watching, I'll explain. Get rid of some excess grease first. A little bit of equal leverage on either side. There we go. So to pack a bearing, the first thing you're going to want is a nice clean gob of grease on a clean glove. Then you're going to take the bearing and you're actually going to take little bites at the edge of your pile of grease until you see grease come up between the bearings here and the race. There's actually some grease coming up through that now. So these are looking pretty good. I went back and did some more measurements and it ended up that this really is the setup that I need for this steering stem. It's the thinner of the two washers that come in the all balls tapered bearing steering stem kit. The other washer though, as you're gonna see, is up here. Now what I'm doing with that is this bearing went on a fair ways, but then it started to bind. It encountered a little bit of resistance. So what I'm actually going to do is use this big fat washer on top of the bearing as a point to tap down on it. And I've actually built a tool to do this. So what we've got here is just a couple of 6-inch pieces of 1¼ inch threaded galvanized pipe. I don't know if it's galvanized or not. I think it is. This is available at your local hardware store. And what we're gonna do is, with everything centered up so that we're not pounding on the race of this bearing, we're pounding on the center section that's actually pressed onto our threaded rod, onto our steering stem. Give it a few taps, get it seated down on there. We're gonna put this in, and this should be a pretty decent fit. I've found that these will go in by hand quite a ways first before you need to apply any brute force and ignorance. And I'll take the old bearing and use that as a driver. And I'm gonna tap on the old bearing, not the new bearing. Like the last time, you wanna make sure this is nice and square, so take your time. Now see how much that moved, just like that? This is gonna go pretty easy. You don't need to kill this. Now, don't worry, I'm driving this old bearing back up in here. The good news is there's a lip on the old bearing, so we're just gonna drive the old bearing back out again anyway. Now the old bearing comes back out, and that installs the lower part of the bearing. Now, the last time I installed one of these, I literally just pressed it in with my hand. Let's see if I get lucky again. Nope. No, sir. Oh, no, if anything, it's pressed in slightly crooked. So again, using our old pieces of bearing, just tap it in. We're perfectly square now. Same as before, just work your way around. Super square, everything's going nice. Almost bottomed out though. Oh yeah, there, that's bottomed. You'll hear it. And all of a sudden, everything will sound very solid. Like gunshots. Now we start putting stuff back together. Washer. The way I was always taught to do like wheel bearings and all that stuff was to tighten everything down pretty snug and then to back it off just a touch, like 1/16, 1/8 of a turn kind of a thing. Because that kind of ensures that everything's nice and tight, but slack enough that it's free to move. Always working it back and forth a little bit, just so everything kind of seats together. Because you'll get a little movement out of it. That's pretty snug right there though. So back it off just a touch. Now, after you drive this thing for a little bit though, chances are you're gonna have to come back, tighten it up just a little bit. It might come loose, or maybe you didn't have everything seated just so perfect. Before sliding the forks back in, I hit the triple trees with a little bit of sandpaper, just to clear some of the corrosion out. On these triple trees, there's a washer. If the washer's lined up perfectly, the fork will come right up through. However, the washer can also be like this. Ain't nothing gonna come up past that. So make sure that they are orientated correctly. And the reason that I didn't know about that was because on my other bike, the Green Bastard, somebody lost those washers like forever ago probably. Yeah. Yes, I know, I'm using power tools to put these bolts in. I'm just letting the clutch engage slightly though. This is not a stripped bolt situation. Use common sense. And yes, hopefully the new owner will replace these broken, crooked ass headlight ears. Well guys, that is going to do it for this video. Listen, we've got the steering stem bearings installed on the CB750K. If this helped you guys do the same thing on your bike, let me know. Smash that like button, comment, tell me this helped, tell me it didn't. This isn't actually the end of Ron Burgundy. We've got one more thing to do, but I'm saving that for the next video. See you guys then.